At the eastern edge of a lost garden, a blade of fire turns in the dark. It does not strike, it simply guards. Behind it stands what the text never describes in full: a place planted by God, watered by a river, marked by trees, and then closed to human feet. That is where the Bible begins its long memory of home. Not with a city, not with a throne, but with an enclosed place and a broken approach. If Eden was only a symbol, why does Genesis speak of rivers and lands and stones? If it was only a location, why has no map ever held it still? The Garden of Eden enters Scripture in a way that feels both simple and strange. Genesis 2 does not sound like a myth drifting in timeless clouds. It names features of earth. It speaks of soil, moisture, trees that are pleasant to the sight and good for food, and a river rising in one place and somehow bound to 4 others. 2 of those rivers are familiar. Hiddekel is the Tigris. Euphrates is the Euphrates. Their names pull the reader toward Mesopotamia, toward the lands between great waters, where cities rose early, and kings learned to measure power in grain and brick. But then the text opens outward into uncertainty. Pishon, Gihon, Havilah, Cush, names that seem close enough to touch, and yet keep moving just beyond certainty. That tension is part of Eden from the start. The Hebrew word gan does not suggest a public park or a wild forest. It suggests an enclosed place, protected, set apart, cultivated. A garden in the ancient world was labor, as much as beauty. It needed boundaries, water, order. And Eden itself carries the sense of delight, abundance, pleasure. The phrase is richer than many English ears first hear. This is not merely greenery. It is the meeting of fertility and joy, shelter and richness, a place where life is held together in right proportion. Yet there is another layer beneath the sound of the word. In the wider world of ancient Mesopotamia, related terms could describe open plain, steppe, even wilderness. That gives the image a sharper edge. Eden may not simply be lush ground. It may be lushness set against barrenness, an oasis against the wild, ordered life inside an untamed world. That detail matters, because Genesis never imagines humanity first waking in a finished civilization. Adam is formed from dust, not marble. The human story begins eastward, in a world that must still be tended. The first task is not conquest, it is keeping, serving, guarding. The garden is gift, but it is also calling. Within it stand 2 trees made central by the story's moral and spiritual tension: the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That second tree is not placed far away on some inaccessible hill. It stands in the middle, near enough to define freedom. Eden is not innocence because there is no choice. Eden is innocence because trust has not yet been broken. So the old question returns: where was this place? People have searched for it in the marshes of southern Iraq, beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf, in the dry channels of Arabia, in the valleys near northwestern Iran, in older memories preserved by neighboring cultures, and in the very architecture of Israel's temple. Some have treated the search like treasure hunting. Others have dismissed it as foolish. But the biblical text itself refuses both extremes. It gives enough geography to invite pursuit, and enough mystery to frustrate possession. That is why Eden has never stayed in one category. It is place, and more than place. It is memory, and more than memory. It stands at the point where biblical history, sacred imagination, ancient geography, and human longing all meet. A river runs through it. But what exactly was lost there? Only a homeland, or a way of being human before fear, hiding, blame, and toil bent the soul inward? To ask where Eden was is not a childish question. It is a serious one, because Genesis itself asks us to think about land direction, borders, and exile. But to ask only where it was is not enough. The story has too much weight for that. Eden is the first place in Scripture where God gives, where humans receive, where command is spoken, where trust is tested, and where access is broken. The turning sword at its gate does more than keep intruders out. It marks the beginning of the long biblical road, from presence to absence, from intimacy to distance, from garden to wilderness, from home to history. And that is why the search matters still. Not because a satellite image could settle the ache. Not because one buried riverbed would answer every question, but because Eden sits at the headwaters of the Bible's deepest themes. If we listen carefully, the story is not only asking where the garden stood, it is asking what kind of world it was, what kind of God walked there, what kind of humans failed there, and why every page after Genesis seems to move under the shadow of a closed gate, and the hope that one day it might open again. Chapter 2 Genesis places Eden in a world that feels almost mappable, yet never fully map-worthy. A river goes out from Eden to water the garden, and from there it is divided, or perhaps related, to 4 heads. That single Hebrew term has stirred debate for generations. Does the picture suggest one source branching into 4 rivers, or does it speak of headwaters, uplands, or linked river systems in a way that does not fit modern hydrology at all? Ancient writers were not drawing topographical survey charts. They were describing a world as they knew and imagined it, where sacred meaning and earthly geography could sit side by side without apology. Still, the names are concrete enough to pull interpreters toward real terrain. Hiddekel, the Tigris, ran east of Assyria. Euphrates moved across the great cradle of Mesopotamian civilization. For an ancient Israelite hearing these names, the scene would not float in abstraction. It would be placed somewhere in relation to the lands of empire, the river valleys where Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian power had taken shape. Those lands were ancient even to later biblical writers. They carried the gravity of origins, cities, kingship, temples, flood traditions, and some of the oldest surviving literature on Earth. Then Genesis adds Pishon, said to wind around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good, along with bdellium and onyx stone. The effect is striking. Havilah is not described as a kingdom or a city. It is known by what the earth yields. Wealth glitters there, but not yet in coins or crowns. This is a landscape of resources, of deep material goodness. Genesis has barely begun, and already the world is charged with value. Creation is not grey. It is textured, fragrant, mineral-rich. Gihon is linked to the land of Cush, and here the puzzle deepens. Cush often points toward Nubia or regions south of Egypt, far from Mesopotamia. Yet in Genesis 2, the context seems to pull eastward. That tension has led some readers to scatter the 4 rivers across the known world, treating Eden as a kind of cosmic center whose waters reach everywhere. Others try to locate another Cush in a more eastern setting. Neither option removes the difficulty. The text feels deliberate, but not easy. That difficulty may not be an accident. Ancient sacred geography often worked by layering memory, symbol, and known terrain. A place could be real without being reducible to modern coordinates. In fact, the more closely Genesis 2 is read, the more carefully it resists simple closure. The garden is planted in Eden, and the phrase often rendered in the East can also carry older resonances of antiquity, primal time, what belongs to the beginning. East in the Bible is frequently more than direction. It becomes orientation. To move east can mean to move away. Cain goes east. The builders of Babel settle in the east. Lot journeys eastward toward Sodom's plain. East becomes a pattern of displacement, as though the world itself has a moral geography. This makes Eden doubly elusive. It may lie eastward, yet it also stands at the source of things, in the deep beginning. The Bible is not embarrassed by that overlap. It wants the listener to feel both the soil underfoot and the distance of origins. Eden is near enough to name, far enough to lose. It also matters that the story comes from a world where rivers meant survival. In the ancient Near East, water determined settlement, agriculture, trade, and political reach. To place paradise by a great river was not poetic excess. It was realism at its most elevated. A land without water was exposed to hunger, migration, and collapse. A watered enclosure was the difference between desolation and security. Royal gardens in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Persia later became symbols of controlled abundance. places where rulers displayed power by making life bloom in harsh environments. Genesis uses no royal boasting here, but it does present the garden as a place where provision flows outward from a source placed by God himself. The human pair enter that place, not as owners but as recipients. That detail can be missed when Eden is treated only as a puzzle to solve. Adam is formed outside the logic of empire. He does not found a dynasty. He is placed. The woman is not a second thought, but the answer to isolation in a world where not good first names loneliness, not mortality. Together they stand in a space that is ordered, generous, and morally charged. Everything in Genesis 2 presses toward trust. The command is simple, the abundance is real, the boundary is clear, which is why the geography and the theology never quite separate. Eden is a landscape, yes, but it is also a relationship arranged in space. God plants, God places, God commands, God walks. The rivers matter because they tell us this is not nowhere. The mystery matters because it tells us this is more than somewhere. The story is constructing a world in which location and meaning are braided together. If later readers have argued over maps, they do so because Genesis itself has invited the search without ever surrendering the secret. Perhaps that is why Eden keeps drawing both archaeologists and theologians. The rivers say, look for traces. The guarded gate says, do not think that tracing will be enough. Long before anyone proposed dried channels in Arabia or drowned plains beneath the Gulf, the text had already shaped the problem. Eden belongs to earth, but it also belongs to the human memory of beginnings, to that first arrangement of life under God's presence that history has never been able to recover by effort alone. Chapter 3, when people set out to locate Eden, they usually begin in southern Mesopotamia, and not without reason. The Tigris and Euphrates are there. Their long history is there. The rise of early cities is there. If any region on Earth could carry the weight of a memory about beginnings, the riverlands of ancient Iraq seem an obvious candidate. But the closer one looks, the more complicated the search becomes. For centuries, interpreters tried to force all four rivers into a single, coherent, modern map. Some identified Gihon with the Nile and Pishon with the Ganges, making Eden the center of the known world rather than a local site. Others sought hidden channels, ancient tributaries, or names that shifted over time. Modern geology added fresh possibilities. Satellite imaging revealed dry river systems buried beneath the deserts of Arabia. One of the most discussed is a great paleochannel running from the western Arabian highlands toward Kuwait, sometimes linked to the biblical Pishon. The theory gained attention because Genesis connects Pishon with Havilah, a land known for gold, and western Arabia includes ancient mining zones, especially around Ma'd ad-Dahab, a place later famous for its gold deposits. Suddenly, the old text seemed to touch buried terrain. It is a powerful idea. During wetter prehistoric periods, now desolate regions of Arabia carried rivers, supported animal life, and offered habitable corridors through what later became vast arid stretches. If an ancient river once crossed that land toward the Gulf, the image of a fertile zone framed by harsher country begins to feel less fanciful. Eden, in this reading, would not sit in a green storybook valley detached from the real world. It would belong to a changing landscape, remembered from a time when climate, water, and human movement made the region look very different from what it is today. Another theory shifts the scene into the basin, now covered by the Persian Gulf. During the last ice age and the long transition that followed, sea levels were lower. Areas now underwater were once exposed land, watered by river systems before the Gulf filled. Some scholars proposed that the original setting behind Eden traditions may have been this fertile plain at the head of the Gulf, where the Tigris and Euphrates and other waterways met before later flooding changed the landscape. The appeal here is obvious. A drowned homeland is exactly the kind of place memory would preserve while geography erased it. A lost plain beneath shallow sea has the right emotional contour for Eden, real, ancient, inaccessible, yet the problems remain stubborn. The Genesis description does not read exactly like a submerged delta reconstruction. Depending on how one takes the river language, the waters seem to go out from Eden rather than gather into it. And even if geological conditions once fit part of the picture, no excavator can raise a sign from the seabed and say, here was the gate, here the trees, here the ground from which Adam was formed. The data can illuminate a plausible environment. It cannot prove the garden. Then there is the Iranian theory, associated with attempts to locate Eden near the highlands of northwestern Iran. This view draws on local river systems, on phonetic similarities between some ancient names and later place names, and on the fact that headwaters and mountain-fed rivers could fit the idea of a source region better than the flat marshlands farther south. In some versions, the Pishon and Gihon are linked to rivers near ancient gold-bearing zones, while the Tigris and Euphrates still remain in broader relation to the same area. The theory has intrigued many readers because it seems to solve a practical problem. Rivers begin in uplands. A source region near mountains feels more natural than a low-lying alluvial plain. But here too caution is needed. Similarity of sound does not guarantee continuity of identity. Ancient names travel, shift, and disappear. The history of the region is dense with language change, migration, conquest, and reinterpretation. It is possible to make old words look persuasive long after their original referents have vanished. A serious reading of Genesis must admit how easily enthusiasm outruns evidence. That is true not only of modern proposals, but of the text itself. Genesis gives enough detail to suggest that the garden is tied to the real world, but not enough to secure a single uncontested location. In that sense, the search has mirrored the story. Human beings stretch toward what was first given and then withheld. We find clues. We do not recover the whole. Still, the geographical pursuit is not wasted. It teaches us to hear the biblical world more concretely. Eden is not framed as a cloud realm. It is set amid rivers, minerals, and lands. It reminds us that the Bible's first pages are rooted in a world of travel, cultivation, and survival. Human life begins not in abstraction but in relation to earth, dust, water, trees, labor, food, boundary, and desire. These are the materials of the story. That earthy realism keeps Eden from dissolving into mere allegory. The narrative wants us so that God's purposes touch geography, ecology, and human livelihood. The goodness of creation is not theoretical. It has taste, scent, and texture. The tragedy of exile is not spiritual in some thin sense. It affects the ground, the body, birth, work, and return to dust. Which means that every theory about Eden's location, even when uncertain, presses us toward the same realization. The garden is not simply about what people believed in later centuries. It is about how Scripture understands the human place in the world from the beginning. We were made for a landscape of provision under God's command. We were not made to live by suspicion. The rivers can still be debated. The loss cannot, chapter 4, before Israel had its own scriptures in final form. The civilizations around it had already spent centuries imagining sacred places where the divine and human worlds touched. In Sumerian and Akkadian literature, one can find gardens, mountains, holy rivers, and lands of wonder. There is Dilmun, a place in ancient texts associated with brightness and purity, though not identical to Eden. There are stories where gods shape humanity from clay, where mortality and wisdom are negotiated, where order emerges from watery chaos. Anyone reading Genesis in the wider ancient Near Eastern context quickly sees that the Bible does not speak into a vacuum. It enters an old conversation about origins. That does not make Genesis derivative in any simple sense. The differences are as important as the echoes. In surrounding cultures, sacred spaces often serve the needs or rivalries of many gods. Kings build gardens to display power. Temples house divine statues. Creation narratives can justify political order or elevate one deity above others in a contested pantheon. Genesis strips much of that away. There is one God. He does not struggle into supremacy. He speaks, forms, plants, commands. No rival deity contests the ground. No human king boasts that he has built paradise. Eden is not a monument to imperial strength. It is a gift set within creation by its maker. That change is profound. It means paradise in Genesis is not first about luxury. It is about relationship rightly ordered. The garden is fertile, but its deepest meaning lies in presence and trust. The man and woman do not create the space, they receive it. They are not priests serving an idol hidden in a dark chamber. They are living creatures addressed by the God who made them. Their dignity does not come from court rank. It comes from vocation. Even so, the world behind Genesis helps sharpen what the story is doing. In royal inscriptions from the ancient Near East, rulers celebrated their ability to tame harsh ground, bring water to dry places, and establish gardens near palaces and sanctuaries. To enclose fertility inside walls was to display control over chaos. In that sense, a garden could symbolize ordered life standing against the threats beyond its boundary. Genesis uses that logic, but it shifts the center. God is the planter. Human beings are not the sovereigns over the enclosed abundance. They are invited into it, entrusted with it, and tested within it. The story also knows the force of sacred mountains, though Genesis 2 does not make the mountain explicit in the same way later biblical texts and interpretations will. A river flows from Eden, and in the ancient imagination rivers often begin in high places associated with divine life. Later texts like Ezekiel can speak of Eden in ways that overlap with the language of God's holy mountain. That helps explain why some readers have seen the garden not merely as farmland but as a sanctuary at the meeting point of heaven and earth. The image would not have sounded foreign in the ancient world. Temples, mountains, waters, and gardens often belong together. But Genesis remains stubbornly restrained. It gives no ornate architectural tour. It does not turn the first humans into demigods. It tells the story in plain words: trees, rivers, command, serpent, fear, exile. This simplicity is part of its power. It allows the narrative to carry both ordinary and cosmic meaning at once. Anyone who has planted, eaten, worked, hidden, or grieved can feel the texture of the account. And yet the consequences stretch across all history. That is one reason later, readers have often misheard Eden, either by flattening it into a literalism with no symbolic depth, or by vaporizing it into pure metaphor with no historical anchor at all. The ancient world did not divide meaning that way. A place could be real and charged with theological significance. A story could speak of history in forms that also gesture toward patterns greater than any single event. Genesis belongs to that mode of thought. It is not embarrassed by layered meaning. The biblical writers who came after Genesis seem to read Eden this way. Prophets use garden language to speak of restoration. Deserts bloom. Waste places become like Eden. Temple imagery absorbs rivers, trees, and sacred eastward orientation. Wisdom traditions turn life with God into something like a return to well-watered order. The story of the garden becomes a deep reservoir beneath the whole Bible. That only makes sense if Eden is more than a missing address. It is the Bible's first portrait of creation in communion with its maker. Even the serpent's entrance gains force against this background. In later imagination, the serpent can become almost larger than the setting, a symbol inflated beyond the careful proportions of Genesis 3. But in the text itself, the serpent enters a world already defined by abundance and command. Evil does not begin by creating another garden. It speaks inside the good one. It twists trust where trust should have been easiest. That is why the fall, if one uses that familiar term, is not merely law-breaking. It is the corruption of the very conditions of delight. Ancient Near Eastern parallels can help us see what is familiar in Eden. They can also help us see what is unique. Genesis offers no tragic cycle in which humans are trapped to feed divine appetites. It offers no world in which paradise belongs only to kings. The first sanctuary of life is given to humanity, before there are cities, armies, taxes, or palaces. That democratizes dignity in a radical way. Every later empire is quietly judged by that beginning. So the historical backdrop does not drain Eden of wonder. It clarifies the kind of wonder it is. This is not a fantasy detached from the world ancient people knew. It is a deliberate biblical vision speaking into that world, using shared images but reordering them under the rule of one God. The result is a story at once familiar and unsettling. Familiar because gardens, rivers, and sacred centers belonged to the thought world of the age. Unsettling because Genesis dares to say that the lost center of human life was not a throne room of empire, but a place of unbroken obedience in the presence of God. Chapter 5. The longer one sits with Genesis 2 and 3, the harder it becomes to treat Eden as only a landscape. The garden behaves like sacred space. It is enclosed, it is planted by God, it is watered from a central source. It contains a place of special restriction in its midst. It is entered from the east and later guarded at its eastern approach by cherubim. Above all, it is the place where God is present in a way the rest of the earth does not yet describe. None of that requires the word temple to appear on the page. The pattern is already there. This is why many scholars have argued that Eden functions as the Bible's first sanctuary. The claim is not that Genesis 2 secretly describes Solomon's temple centuries before it was built in exact architectural terms. The claim is more careful than that. It is that later tabernacle and temple imagery seems to echo Eden, as if Israel's holiest space was designed to remember a more ancient one. The parallels are suggestive. The entrance of the tabernacle and temple faces east. Cherubim appear in the sanctuary and then again at Eden's boundary. Precious stones show up in descriptions related to sacred presence. A river or life-giving water flows from God's holy dwelling in later prophetic visions, just as a river issues from Eden. The lampstand in the holy place, shaped like a stylized tree, has often been read as a deliberate memory of the tree of life. Perhaps most striking is the language of Adam's task. He is placed in the garden to work it and keep it. Those English verbs can sound purely agricultural, and no doubt labor in the soil is included. But the same Hebrew terms later appear together in priestly contexts for serving and guarding the tabernacle. That does not mean Adam is a Levite before Levi exists. It means the Bible itself may want us to hear priestly overtones in humanity's first vocation. The human being in Eden is not there merely as a farmer. He is a servant guardian in sacred space. That reading changes the emotional register of the story. The sin in Genesis 3 is no longer just an act of appetite. It is also a failure of trust within a sanctuary. A sacred trust is broken by those meant to keep what was given. The serpent is allowed to speak where discernment should have answered. The boundary is crossed. The one charged to guard does not guard. In that light, exile from the garden is not only expulsion from a pleasant environment, it is removal from immediate sacred presence. The detail of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day deepens the point. The picture is intimate, but it is also liturgical in the broadest sense. God is not a distant force inferred from nature. He is present, moving within the ordered space he established. That same cluster of ideas later surrounds tabernacle language, where God dwells among his people. Eden, then, is not simply where human life begins biologically. It is where fellowship begins covenantally. And that makes the command about the tree more intelligible. In sacred space, not everything is for human grasping. Holiness always involves gift and limit together. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not evil in itself. Its danger lies in taking what has been withheld. The issue is not that God fears human growth. The issue is whether human beings will receive wisdom in trust or seize moral autonomy by rebellion. That tension belongs naturally in a sanctuary because sanctuaries teach creaturely limits before divine reality. Later Israel would know this pattern well. The Holy of Holies was not common ground. Priests had duties, boundaries, cleansing rites, and warnings. Unauthorized approach could kill. Sacred space was life-giving, but not casual. Eden carries an earlier form of that same seriousness. It is gentle, abundant, and unspeakably good, yet also morally structured. Freedom there is not lawlessness. It is the joy of living rightly within God's order. The temple reading also explains why the loss of Eden ripples so widely through the Bible. If the first humans were exiled from the first sanctuary, then much of biblical history can be read as the story of access lost and partially restored. Altars arise, the tabernacle is built, the temple stands and falls. Exile from the land echoes exile from the garden. The prophets promise return not only to territory but to presence. By the time one reaches the last pages of Scripture, the imagery becomes unmistakable. River, tree of life, healing, dwelling of God with humanity. The end of the story sounds like the beginning, except enlarged beyond one enclosed garden to a renewed creation. But it is important not to flatten the point into mere abstraction. Eden as sanctuary does not cancel Eden as place. The Bible rarely works by replacing earth with symbol. Rather, it makes earth symbolic because earth matters. The garden is sacred, precisely because it is planted in creation, because water flows there, because trees bear fruit there, because humans have bodies there. Biblical theology does not escape the physical. It transfigures it. That is why the old argument over whether Eden was literal or symbolic can miss the texture of the text. Eden is presented as the kind of place where symbolism is built into reality. A garden can be both agricultural and theological. A river can be both hydrological and sacramental in meaning. A tree can feed the body and test the soul. A boundary can protect land and define worship. The biblical imagination does not force us to choose only one layer. So when later generations remembered Eden, they were not simply recalling a vanished orchard. They were remembering humanity's first commission in the presence of God, and the first failure of that commission. The garden was the first world in miniature, ordered, fruitful, bounded, alive with divine nearness. To be driven east of it was to lose more than shelter. It was to lose the center. Chapter 6, the expulsion from Eden, is told with remarkable economy. There is no long courtroom scene, no drawn-out lament. A few sentences carry the weight of all history. The humans hide, they blame. God speaks judgment into serpent, woman, man, and ground. Then garments are made. Then the man and woman are sent out, away from the garden from which the human had been taken. Cherubim are stationed. A flaming sword turns every way to guard the way to the tree of life. The key word there may be way. Not merely place, but way. Eden is closed not like a locked warehouse, but like a path now barred. The route back to life cannot be taken by human initiative. That detail matters because the rest of the Bible is full of roads, paths, returns, and preparations. The road back to God's presence becomes one of Scripture's deepest longings. The direction of exile matters too. The human pair are driven eastward from the garden. Cain will settle farther east. Later, human rebellion in Genesis often moves east or gathers there. This does not make East a simple villain in biblical geography. Many great events happen in the East, but in Genesis, eastward motion begins to carry the taste of distance from the place of communion. It is as if the world has been tilted. Direction becomes spiritual memory. That helps explain why Eden became such a powerful frame for Israel's own story. When the nation loses its land and goes into exile under Assyria and Babylon, the wound is not only political, it feels like a repetition of something older. To be expelled from the land where God placed you is to relive the first displacement. The prophets understand this. They speak of return in language that reaches beyond politics. Waste places will become like gardens. Waters will spring up in desert. The curse on the ground will not have the last word. Underneath Israel's national history lies the older human story first told in Eden. The exile from the garden also changes labor. Before sin, the human vocation involved tending and keeping. After sin, the ground resists. Thorns and thistles enter the story. Bread comes by sweat. The difference is not between work and no work. It is between work in harmony and work under frustration. That is one reason the Eden account still feels so close to ordinary life. Most people know the ache of labor that does not easily yield, of effort entangled with anxiety, of desires disordered, relationships strained, and the environment itself no longer effortless ally but reluctant partner. Genesis is not describing an abstract doctrine here. It is naming the texture of human life, as most people have actually known it. Even death is framed through exclusion. Dust you are, and to dust you shall return is not spoken into a neutral world. It is spoken after access to the tree of life is cut off. Mortality becomes bound to exile. Humanity does not merely become finite in some cool philosophical sense. Humanity is severed from the sustaining gift it was not meant to grasp on its own terms. The sorrow of the story lies partly in this. The life once held open by presence now lies beyond a guarded boundary. And yet the scene is not without mercy. Before the expulsion, garments are given. It is a small detail, easily hurried past, but it softens the edge of judgment without removing it. God does not abandon the human pair naked to the wilderness. The first movement after guilt and fear is not annihilation, but a mixture of sentence and care. That pattern too will echo through Scripture. Judgment is real. So is undeserved provision within judgment. The cherubim at the gate carry forward into Israel's latest sacred imagination. Cherubim appear over the ark, woven into tabernacle curtains, carved into temple space. They mark the boundary of holiness. In Eden, they do not simply frighten. They testify that the lost garden remains under divine claim. Paradise is not destroyed. It is protected from seizure. That means hope is not extinguished. It is deferred. This is why later readers who treat Eden merely as a tale of primitive innocence miss its gravity. The story is not mainly about naivete lost. It is about vocation betrayed, trust broken, presence withdrawn, and a world altered at the level of ground, body, and future. It speaks to moral fracture, but also to historical consciousness. The world as people now know it is not self-explanatory. Something has gone wrong in it, and Genesis tells that wrong as a departure from a real order established by God. It also explains the human ache for home in a way that is deeper than nostalgia. We do not simply miss comfort, we miss coherence. We long for a world where desire is not bent against duty, where labor yields without cruelty, where God is not hidden behind fear, where life is not stalked by death, where the way to the center is not barred. Eden gives that longing a first name. And for all the arguments about rivers and lost plains, this may be why the story endures so stubbornly. The geography can be debated because the wound is recognized. People who have never read Hebrew, never studied ancient floodplains, never traced Pishon on a speculative map, still understand exile, blame, toil, and the distance between what is and what ought to be. Eden names the original harmony. East of Eden names the human condition. Chapter 7, if Eden were only about origins, it would remain trapped in the first pages of Genesis. But the Bible keeps returning to it, sometimes directly, often by echo. The return is rarely sentimental. Eden becomes a pattern by which later events are measured. Take the tabernacle and temple. These are not simply ritual centers for a tribal religion trying to imitate its neighbors. In biblical thought, they are carefully bounded spaces where heaven and earth meet by grace. Their holiness is dangerous, their access restricted, their imagery thick with memory. Gold, carved trees, lampstands, cherubim, eastward entrance, priestly service, guarded inner space. All of it begins to sound like a remembered world. Israel does not rebuild Eden in full. It receives a sign of presence within history, a provisional sanctuary in a fallen world. That sanctuary itself can be lost. When Jerusalem falls and the temple is destroyed, the shock is enormous. It feels as though the center has once again been breached or withdrawn. Exile to Babylon is political catastrophe, but it is also theological crisis. Has the God who dwelt among his people abandoned them? The prophetic answer is severe and hopeful at once. The exile is deserved but not final. The God of Eden is still the God of history. He can restore what judgment has stripped. So the prophets begin to speak in Edenic language. Isaiah imagines desert blossoming. Ezekiel envisions waters flowing from a future temple, deepening as they go, healing dead regions, turning barren banks into places lined with fruit trees whose leaves do not wither. The imagery is not accidental. A river from the sanctuary recalls the river from Eden. Fruit for life in a healed land recalls the first garden. Restoration is pictured not merely as rebuilt walls or stable government, but as the renewal of creation under divine presence. Ezekiel also deepens the mysterious link between Eden, mountain, and holiness. In one passage reflecting on a figure cast down from glory, Eden is called the Garden of God and placed alongside the holy mountain. Whatever the interpretive difficulties of that text, it shows that within the Bible's own imagination, Eden had become more than a private orchard. It was a high, holy realm of proximity to God. That supports what Genesis has already hinted. The garden is sacred geography. By the Second Temple period, Jewish reflection on Eden had grown in many directions. Some traditions emphasized paradise as a lost earthly realm. Others associated it with the abode of the righteous, with wisdom, with Torah, or with the world to come. The variety itself is revealing. Eden had become a way of talking about the deepest human hope for restored life under God. Yet that later richness still grows from the Genesis root. There is no later paradise without the first garden and its first exile. The New Testament picks up the same current, though often quietly. When Jesus is crucified outside the city and speaks of paradise, the word carries centuries of longing. When he rises in a garden setting in John's Gospel, readers sensitive to biblical echoes have often heard a deliberate resonance. The gardener of mistaken identity is not a trivial misunderstanding. In a story saturated with scriptural memory, it may sound like a whisper that new creation has begun, where death expected to close the ground forever. Then the final book of the Bible gathers the strands openly. In Revelation, the New Jerusalem descends from God. A river of the water of life flows from the throne. On either side stands the tree of life, yielding fruit, its leaves for the healing of the nations. The curse is no more. God dwells with his people. Notice the movement. The Bible does not end by returning humanity to one hidden enclosure somewhere in the ancient Near East. It ends by opening the reality. Eden pointed toward across a renewed world. The garden becomes a city without losing its river and tree. Sacred space expands until it is no longer a guarded pocket inside creation, but creation remade as dwelling place. That shift is essential. Eden was enclosed. The final vision is permeated. In the beginning, the way to the tree of life was blocked. In the end, the nations walk in healing light. The old separation between sanctuary and world is overcome. The Holy of Holies in Israel's temple had the form of a perfect cube. The New Jerusalem is described with the same kind of shape, as though the innermost chamber of divine presence has expanded to become the home of redeemed humanity. This is why Eden cannot be reduced to a lost coordinate on an old map. Its force in Scripture lies in the way it frames the whole drama. Creation, vocation, failure, exile, partial restoration, final renewal. The Bible's story arcs through that pattern again and again. And at each stage, the question is not only where people stand on earth, but whether they stand in the presence of God without fear. The search for Eden's location can sharpen our reading of Genesis. The theology of Eden can deepen our reading of the whole Bible. Together they tell us that the first garden was neither a decorative myth nor a crude puzzle. It was the opening sanctuary of history, the place where humanity first learned what it meant to receive life from God, and the place where that trust was first shattered. Every later promise of restoration speaks with that loss in the background.